I'm George Gallerise. I work at SSC Pacific. For those of you that aren't familiar with the lab, it's like Prince. It's a lab formerly known as NRAB, formerly known as NOS. We've been around for about 80 years doing C4ISR. And on behalf of my colleague Rachel Vollner and our commanding officer and our executive director, I want to thank AFCEA National and as well as AFCEA Pacific chapter for inviting us to share our views today. So we have three goals this afternoon. One, obviously, is to stop talking before you stop listening. The second one is to leave you mildly dissatisfied. And the reason I say that, in an hour, you can only really surf the wave tops of this pretty complex subject. So AFCEA has posted the paper that fed this brief on their website that you can go to, and particularly as you see us allege things throughout this brief, it's got the citations to back them up. And there's also an article we did for the June Naval Institute proceedings on this subject, and the title should intrigue you. It's called Producing Unmanned Systems Even Lawyers Can Love, which it kind of trip up or get you thinking about what this is about. And then the third goal we have today is we'd like to appeal to everyone here, but particularly for those of you in industry, because when we put up some of the end slides about what augmented intelligence needs to look like, our point coming from the government side is that these are problems, we think low-hanging fruit that nobody's working on yet, but that the government, particularly the Navy and Marine Corps team, needs to have worked on. So there's a new unmanned systems roadmap for those of you that follow this. And I think we pulled this quote out simply because technology has exploded. Now the question becomes, what are we going to do with it and how are we going to make it work for us? You can't hear from people from a military organization without an outline. So we'll talk about these things today, and then we'll really focus on the future and where we're hoping to go with unmanned systems, big data, AI, and machine learning. We're coming at this as technologists. My background is I spent 30 years on active duty as a naval aviator. Rachel's background is she's a China expert, has a high-end degree and advanced degree in China studies and a fluent maritime speaker. But we've been there between the two of us now for a quarter century, and this is the bread and butter of what we're most interested in and why we're here to share this with you all. Dr. Peter Singer addressed the San Diego chapter of AFCEA at this conference last year, and I'd ask you to keep this quote in mind and that association between driverless cars and military unmanned systems. So from a perspective point of view, our Quadrennial Defense Review is one of the highest end DoD documents that talks about what the expectations are for the technologies we have, and this is talking about what we expect unmanned systems to do for the military writ large. Anyone trained by the Jesuits or know at least a little bit of Latin? No one. Omni trium perfectum, that which is perfect comes in threes. I just want to put up three circles and show you the Venn diagram that supports them. So any Navy folks here know what DASH is? Want to share? Okay, DASH is something the Navy came up with in the 1960s. It stood for Drone Anti-Submarine Helicopter. And at that time, Soviet submarines could outstick our surface combatants with torpedoes. So the idea was you take two torpedoes, hang them on a flying machine, take them out and dump them on the Soviet submarine before they shoot you. Great concept. Unfortunately, in the late 60s, the most common words heard over the 1MC general announcing system on Navy ships was dash officer bridge, because the dash had gone out over the horizon and it never came back. So great concept, the technology didn't support it. Fast forward a couple of decades, in the early 1980s, I was XO of USS New Orleans, LPH-11, McNamara era ship. And we were testing Pioneer unmanned systems. We actually strung little arresting wires across the flight deck there. Our commanding officer was Larry, someone you probably know, Doug Brott, Vietnam era A7 pilot, and his goal was to come back to the pier on Friday afternoon with as many Pioneers as we left with Monday morning. We left with 3 on Monday morning. We came back with 1 on Friday afternoon. Why? The technology wasn't there. One Pioneer did an uncommanded ditch on downwind. The other one went over the horizon. We don't know what happened. So again, great concept. Technology just wasn't there. Today at our lab, as I'll get to toward the end of the brief, we have about 450, 500 people working on unmanned systems, let alone the people working on AI, machine learning, big data. So it's big business for us with about 15% of our workforce. So that's where we're coming from our perspectives. I'll toggle through these bullets very quickly, but these are things I think all of us who are in the business can understand. And I'll really focus during this brief on those last 2 bullets is make them more autonomous, but make them employable. And it's not an either or, but it's a gray area that we need to address. So there's a plan for unmanned systems. Here's a quote from the roadmap. And again, People think of unmanned systems as complete autonomy, going downrange with a weapon. That's not what the Navy's view is. It's to help warfighters make better decisions faster with fewer people and fewer mistakes under stress. And that's what we want AI to do for us. So this roadmap just came out, even though it says 2017, it was released in August this summer. It's 4 years newer than the old roadmap. But we'll talk about today the second and the fourth bullet, autonomy and human-machine collaboration, which I think you've probably heard something about. Since we're Navy Command, wanted to address what our CNO says about unmanned systems and how they're married with autonomy and machine learning, and that is the art of it, is taking that unmanned system and not having a person at the controls all the time, but having it be autonomous or semi-autonomous. So there's something called offset strategies. Quite frankly, there's been much more heat than light about offset strategies, but since they impact unmanned systems and AI and machine learning so heavily, I wanted to address them. This is what Mr. Work said about them. And again, offset means we offset the enemy's advantage, and we're not trying to meet the enemy man for man or tank for tank, because in most cases, we can't do that. So there's something called the third offset strategy, but that kind of begs the question, if this is the third one, what were the first two? And they're right here, a little more of a description. If you recall, those of you that served during the Cold War, the single organizing impulse for the Department of Defense was stopping the 350 Warsaw Pact divisions from coming through the Fulda Gap. We couldn't outman or out-tank them, so we came up with tactical nuclear weapons and eventually the nuclear triad to offset the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact's advantage. Eventually, they caught up with nuclear weapons, had nuclear parity, so we brought in these kinds of technologies, called it the second offset strategy of the 1970s, to offset the Soviet Union Warsaw Pact advantages. Now, thankfully, we never went to war with the Soviet Union, but we did use these technologies. Anyone know where? Against the Soviet-equipped and trained army in 1991 with Desert Storm, and you all know the results. So, but the Soviet Union caught up. So if we were just going to brief you on the third offset strategy, this is where you see the obligatory diagram you see in most government briefings with the Greek structure, with the pillars and all that. There are 5 pillars to the offset strategy, but we're going to focus only on the technical one today. And that composes these things. And as we go around them, just some quick examples. This, I think a lot of you know, is Go. And as you all know, it's been widely reported that AlphaGo defeated first the South Korean champion and then the Chinese champion. Unfortunately for the Chinese, they described that as their Sputnik moment. And now the Chinese are investing hundreds of billions of dollars in AI. They want to be the world's AI leader, so does Russia. Human-machine collaboration. This is a picture of a cockpit of a Joint Strike Fighter that my friend Neil Zerbe, former Tomcat pilot, once referred to as a flying server farm. 10 billion lines of code. It's all about software. And again, this is where AI machine learning assists. Human-assisted operations, Army and the Marine Corps are leading with that, with exoskeletons and those sorts of things. Human-machine combat teaming. In the aviation world, that's Triton teaming with the P-8. That's the H-60 teaming with the Fire Scout. Those kind of human-machine teamings. And again, this is a picture of a Tomahawk doing things that Tomahawks didn't do when they were first invented. So these are the kind of technologies that we're bringing into the Navy, Marine Corps, the rest of the DoD that employ AI and machine learning. So we underline these particular phrases because it's not really just making the machine smart, it's making the human and the machine compatible where they can team together. So what does man-machine teaming mean? Was anyone here at the at ONR's A2I Summit in San Diego last month? About 350 people. It was the Applied Artificial Intelligence Summit. This was from the program, but you see the human brain and the machine, and it's human-machine teaming. So that sounds a little academic. What does that really mean? There are a lot of famous photos from World War II. Some of you probably recognize this one. This was taken by Lieutenant John Moore, the Signal Corps. This is General Eisenhower speaking with the 101st Airborne Division on June 5th, the eve of D-Day. Why was he speaking with them? Because Marshal Lee Mallory predicted that there would be 80% casualties for the 101st. So again, very famous picture from World War II, but he used that as a metaphor to talk about what does human-machine teaming mean. To people who are completely zealous and saying, bring it on with unmanned systems, this is what it means. General Eisenhower's talking to a cadre of robots who are going to be the ones to go into battle. There are people who are fearful of unmanned systems in the military, and this is their view of the future. The robot talking to the soldiers and the soldiers taking orders from the robots. But I think the reality is, and what we're trying to get at is it's here, and you see this is a little bit artfully done. It's not a bunch of robots over here and a bunch of soldiers over here. It's the soldier with his robot partner going into battle. So again, that just kind of brings out the man-machine teaming part of it. And again, this is what the roadmap says. This is what we want to do. We want to team humans and machines, not have the machines fight the battle over here and the humans fight the battle over here. So all that's well and good. All's not that well with autonomous systems, and here's why. This is the former Unmanned Systems roadmap, and they call out how costly manpower is. And unmanned systems are really a misnomer. And again, we cover this in great detail in the paper and give some stats from IHS Janes and Office of Management and Budget and other sources. But the idea is you have to decrease the cost of manning your unmanned system. This year's roadmap, the new roadmap, says aspirationally we want to get away from having many humans control one unmanned systems and get to the point where one human is controlling multiple unmanned systems and that person ceases being an operator and turns into a mission manager. So that's the aspirational goal. Again, in the paper we have a lot more, but just one stat to show you how expensive military manpower costs are. And again, for the Navy, it's probably worse than the other services because if someone's operating an unmanned system out of Creech Air Force Base, when they're finished their duty shift, they go home. On a Navy ship, you have to give them a bunk, you have to feed them, you have to take care of admin needs, et cetera, so it's probably worse for the Navy. So we've got this quest for autonomy. We're trying to make systems more autonomous, but as we're leaping forward to do that, there is a potential dark side. So it's late in the afternoon. I know some of us may be fading a little bit. So American Film Institute, that's an association of about 15 professionals in the film industry, producers, directors, critics, historians, etc. And every year they do numerous surveys, best films, best actor, best actress. One of their surveys is the best movie quote. And these quotes change because movies fade from memory and new movies come in. But year over year, for as long as I've been tracking this, well over a decade, one movie quote has been the #1 quote, bar none, year over year. Anyone want to take a guess? No penalties for wrong answers.
I think we need a bigger vote.
No, sir, that's not it. I think that might be in the top 20. Sir, you look like you got an answer on the tip of your tongue.
Frankly, Scarlett,
Keep going, man.
I don't give a damn.
That's it. Gone with the Wind, 1939 movie. Okay, so great, so we're on a roll. So how about number 78? Anyone? How about some hints? No, it's not that. So it's got astronauts in it. It's got a robot in it. Sir? No, that's a newer movie. This is an older movie, 1968. Does that help? Somebody back there. What? Yeah, what was the quote? Open the pod bay doors, please. Hal, 1968. Movie was very prescient. Why do we use this here? This is what the diet that the public is being fed. And I'm not saying it's bad they're being fed, that these are normal people walking around who vote for your congressmen and senators who are exposed to things like this and they go, ooh, that's scary. Maybe that could happen. And it's not just 2001. It's other more modern movies. Many of you seen her. And how about who's seen the last movie? Okay. Scary. This is, 2001's very binary. You turn me off, I kill you. This one, if you haven't seen the movie, this robot seduces this guy to help her escape. Again, and these are good robots, right? We're not talking about Terminator or Skynet. We're talking about good robots. So the point is, for those of us in the military and industry and elsewhere who design, test, field, and use unmanned systems, the bar is pretty high. Well, it's not just movies. It's some of the major media. I think some of you probably read The Economist, and this is the quote, and I just bolded that last part of the last sentence, that most people who do work on unmanned systems would design them differently if left to their own devices. So the key is obviously putting these people together. A little more recently, again, there are concerns on the part of the public that we in the military aren't going to have control of our unmanned system. So, but look at these. This is kind of, isn't this sort of the liberal East Coast media? These are these wonky people that don't get it. What about the people up in Silicon Valley that design these things? I mean, the techies that, they're not concerned, are they? Well, yeah, they are. And they're saying some pretty extraordinary things. This was Elon Musk before he was smoking weed, I think. But the point is, they are raising concerns with the public. So the point we're trying to make is that the bar is extremely high for us in the military to prove that we'll do no harm with artificial intelligence. Who's seen this series? Okay, episode 4, remember Victor, what he did? Drone operator at Creech Air Force Base.
Only episode 3, right?
Okay, well, I don't want to ruin it for you. Anyway, so yeah, so Victor shoots somebody with his unmanned system and gets very distraught about it, et cetera, et cetera. I won't ruin it for you. But again, this has entered the popular culture. And you know, when we watch that, you're empathizing with Victor, let alone the PTSD things that go along with that. It's a whole new subject. But
Origin.
yes, yeah, exactly. So again, these are the concerns. So if you can't control what a lethal unmanned system is doing without humans in the loop, what do you do? And our answer to this is putting the right degree of autonomy. Again, the word design keeps coming up. This was an earlier Defense Science Board report saying that we need to design these things better. And that's why we're all here, and that's why we're appealing to those of you in industry who have the R&D money that we in government don't have to design some of these solutions. So again, coming up at this as C4ISR people and techies, I can tell you my former next-door neighbor in Coronado was the former commander of Naval Air Forces, and at the time he was the unmanned systems guy at Northrop Grumman, and just talking across the hedge, he would tell me their latest unmanned system and how high it flew and how far it went and all these things. But we started talking about how do you control it, or what does it do for you? That's not our department. Someone else does that. Well, we hope that you all are the someone else's. So we'll talk about how we get there, and it's something we call augmented intelligence, and money talks I'll get to when we talk about what the lab does. Again, everything we've heard, everything we've read, the senior people we've talked to say it's not about launching Terminator downrange with weapons without any control. It's about speeding up decisions for decision makers. So remember back at Peter Singer's quote earlier about watch the driverless car community and how that's evolving? You can kind of break it down, I think, into 3 types of driverless cars. The first one is the one your parents drove, with a roll-down window and 5-button punch radio, et cetera, et cetera. That's one way to do it. The other one is a driverless car that takes you where you want to go, kind of Uber without the driver. And for those of you who have friends or kids who work in Silicon Valley, most of them are probably ready to embrace this right now. They don't want to own a car. They don't want to mess with a car. They want to get to where they're going with no fuss, no muss. But what we're talking about with this augmented intelligence idea is the most tricked out Mercedes-Benz that you could buy. So to give you a very simplistic example, my wife's car has a camera. When she backs up, she can see what she's about to hit. She doesn't have any of that beep, beep, beep stuff that warns you. My car has the beep, beep, beep stuff, but it doesn't have a camera. Nor does it have those cool side mirror things where you're about to make a turn and it tells you you're going to hit somebody. So the point is, if you bought the most tricked out Mercedes you could possibly buy, that would have what we call augmented intelligence as opposed to, again, something your parents drove or a completely driverless car. Why is this an issue? It wasn't that many years ago. Press reports that you read said driverless cars are coming, and they're coming fast. About 2 years ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that predicted that the San Francisco suburbs were going to explode. Why? Because it costs too much to live in the city. You could move to the burbs, Walnut Creek, not own a car, and the driverless car would pick you up and take you to work and take you home, et cetera, and that would be nirvana. These are the kind of articles that have started appearing now where people go, whoa, not so fast. Didn't we just kill someone? Didn't this not work the way it was predicted? All of these titles, again, they're in our paper, but You could Google any one of those titles. It'll take you to Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post article. I just want to focus on one because I think it highlights the concerns the public has with driverless cars. And I'm not anti-driverless cars. I'm just saying the enthusiasm that was there 3 or 4 years ago is starting to wane. So they did this little survey asking people what kind, pretty simple question, right? They made it pretty black and white. This is the answer they got. Sure, I want the utilitarian car out there, but not for my family. Kind of NIMBY. I want to protect my family above all costs. So the point is, if we can't sort out these kind of issues with something as simple as driverless cars, what are we going to do with weaponized unmanned systems where we have to deal with these things in a lethal scenario? So just like the driverless car headlines, there have been headlines about unmanned systems, and again, most of them go to the military might not be able to control their unmanned systems. AI and machine learning are leaping ahead, and they're going to launch Terminator downrange, and it'll be a very bad thing. But again, the point is, these are the concerns the public has, and that's why the bar is so high for us in industry and the military to do it right. The DoD policy is very strong and very clear-cut, that we're not going to have lethal weaponized drones going downrange and whooping up on people. We're going to have a human either in the loop or on the loop. And we could talk about those in the Q&A, the difference and what they mean. So there's something called Augmented Intelligence. We came up with this phrase concurrently with the quote I'm about to show you with the former PAC Fleet Commander, Admiral Scott Swift. And what it means is making the human smarter. Again, making the human like that tricked out Mercedes-Benz as opposed to the car that your parents drove. And this is how Admiral Swift put it in his article in Naval Institute Proceedings. This idea of intelligence augmentation, making the human smarter. Not making just the machine smarter, making the human who's teamed with the machine smarter so the human can catch up with the machine, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So, put another way, at the West Symposium, co-hosted by AFCEA, the Naval Institute, earlier this year. For those of you in the Navy, Admiral Kuhlman is the budget director for the Navy, so he's the guy who controls the money, so people pay attention to what he says. And again, he's saying that we're going to invest our money in the Navy to give commanders the edge to make better decisions faster with fewer people, fewer mistakes. We're going to use AI to do that, and I'll explain in a minute how we're going to do that. Anyone recognize this fella? Colonel John Boyd, U.S. Air Force, 1950s. Okay, remember what he came up with? Something called, not you, someone else? OODA loop, okay? The OODA loop is back, okay? This is Colonel Boyd's textbook diagram of the OODA loop, and it looks, you know, for those of us who are not necessarily electrical engineers, it looks a little complicated, but that's how he originally explained it. This is how it's being explained in the Navy today. Last year, our Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, spoke at the Current Strategy Forum in Newport, and he talked about technology, and he talked about AI and machine learning. His talk lasted over an hour, and you can watch it on YouTube if you go on the Naval War College's website. But what he talked about was the OODA loop, and he basically said for years and years, for decades actually, the Navy has been working on all 4 aspects of the OODA loop, putting money into everything from act, observe, orient, and decide. And he said, and Admiral Kuhlman backed him up at West earlier this year, we've gotten pretty dang good at the observe part. We have lots of sensors, lots of things that can do ISR, and we've got pretty good at the act part. But we haven't done very well at the orient and decide part. And why is that? It's not because people are stupid or lazy, it's because the technologies haven't existed to really make a go at getting better at those aspects. So that's where we, the Navy, are investing our AI and machine learning money, and it's not just going internal to Navy labs, it's going to industry who can help us solve these problems. So, you know, even at that, that's a little academic. This is what Mr. Work said, what we're trying to do with this. And here's AFI again. Have I scrambled my slides? So there's another movie that was ranked, I'll tell you, it was ranked 94 last year by the American Film Institute. And I'll start giving you some hints and see who chimes up first, anyone but my friend Neil Zerbe. Tom Cruise, Kelly McGillis, Tom Skerritt, Top Gun. Okay, anybody remember the quote from Top Gun? It's the 94 most popular quote. I can't believe everyone doesn't have the tip of their tongue. No, sir. Back there. I feel the need for speed. Okay, when Maverick is high-fiving with Goose. So why do I use this as an example? If we really want to break it down to the basics, those of you that remember this 1986 movie, so it's a little over an hour into the movie. Tom Cruise or Maverick and Goose have gotten in this horrible accident. Remember, they got in the downwash of the other jet. They crash. Maverick gets out. Goose dies. And he's devastated. He goes before a board, and the board says you're clear to fly. So on the other side of the aisle, you've got Viper, who's Tom Skerritt. He's the leader of Top Gun. And then you've got Jester. Anybody remember who Jester was? Jester's a training officer, and he has been grinding Maverick, you know, because Maverick's kind of a jerk and big ego. He's been grinding. But how does he feel after this crash? Viper says, get him back in the air right away. And they do. They put him on a training hop. He's got a new Rio, and they're on an ACM hop, and Maverick and his new Rio, they have got Viper locked in. They are seeing him. They could shoot him. What's the Rio in the back telling Maverick? Take the shot. Take the shot. And what's Jester, the guy who used to hate him? What's Jester in the trail airplane telling him? Take the shot, kid. He's not taking the shot. And the point is, with the OODA loop, he's got the observe part down, but he's stuck in that orient and decide part. So again, we just offer that as an example that kind of brings it down to real life. Is that's what the Navy's trying to solve now, is that orient and decide equation with AI and machine learning. Why are we rushing to solve it now? Because 5 years ago, we didn't have the technologies to make a go at it. More recently, Mr. Gertz, those of you that are west, remember him saying this, that if we can make decisions faster than the enemy, we'll win every time. We need AI and machine learning to do that. Anybody remember this article from the Wall Street Journal last year? This is talking about augmenting our brains. And the point of the article was, with technology advancing as fast as it is today, that our brains have trouble keeping up. I know that doesn't happen to anyone in this room, maybe other people. And so the point is, we need to make ourselves smarter. So the solution sometimes scientists have come up with is something called direct transcranial current stimulation. And what it is, it's basically an EEG in reverse, where they put a bed of nails in your head and they stimulate your cortex so you can keep up with the technology. Anyone want to volunteer to do that? I didn't think so. But the point is, technology is advancing, our brains aren't. Last year at the IC Search conference, this is what the Army Research Lab's chief scientist said. It said the limiting factor on the battlefield is that commander, that private, that warfighter trying to make decisions faster than the enemy can make them. And again, how do we solve that cognitive bandwidth without putting electrodes in people's brains and stimulating their cortex? So earlier this year at the ONR Summit, Dr. Hazeltine said that this is what AI should be doing for us, is helping our brains keep up with the technology and have them work in concert. So we're going to put up 2 slides of what we view as augmented intelligence. And again, this is, in our view, the payoff for those of you in industry, where you look at those bullets and you go, yeah, we could do that, because you need to have it done. So let's take the example of military surveillance systems, something like the Triton unmanned system. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Triton, think of it as a naval version of the Global Hawk. It mainly surveils the ocean, because we're Navy Marine Corps. So let's say the operator is sitting in a room at Whidbey Island controlling an unmanned Triton that's flying from Whidbey Island to Tokyo. At cruise speed, that's about 15 hours. Right now, with today's technology, that lieutenant is sitting in front of a screen watching 15 hours of mostly empty ocean. Remember we talked earlier about how we don't have the manpower to do this? And again, in the paper, we give lots of examples of the fact that the Air Force can't fly all of its unmanned systems because it doesn't have enough operators. I mean, it is that bad. So does the surveillance system do this of show you 15 hours of mostly empty ocean? Or does it alert the operator when it sees a vessel? It says, hey, I see a vessel. And then once it does that, does it do some pretty simple AI machine learning type things? Does it tell you whether it's in a normal shipping channel or whether it's going some different funny direction, which alerts you that, ooh, that might be a problem? Does it query its AIS system and say, well, what is it squawking, basically, to use an aviation example? And then does it show the vessel's point of origin? I mean, vessels have to file a voyage plan with the International Maritime Organization. So these things are all available in a database somewhere, but databases that are arduous and almost impossible for humans to scan themselves. And then once it does that for you, game over, or does it say, no, I think we should look over here. Why should we look over here? Vessels it's found or not found. Other friendly surveillance systems that are feeding it, and it says, oh, my partner over here didn't see anything over here, but over there no one's looked at yet. Why don't I go over there for you? Or does it tell you what geeks are showing? Or does it have automatic detection and classification algorithms? And then for the pilots in the audience, I know you always watch your fuel ladder. If you're in a room, we hope you're watching the unmanned systems fuel state, but you know it's not that kind of gut thing like you're going to die. So does it tell you, hey, I need to come back, I need to go off station? So again, fairly basic things, but these are challenges we're trying to solve. And again, we reach out to those of you in industry to help us solve them. So that's for surveillance systems. The bar is a lot higher for lethal unmanned systems, the kind that, not to spoil episode 4 for you, the kind that Victor was controlling from his room in Creech Air Force Base. So remember, it's not a lieutenant or a captain sitting at a screen and deciding on their own whether to take the shot. At a minimum, they're talking to someone senior in that control center, asking them if they could take a shot. And they're being asked a lot of questions, and sometimes it's talking to someone in the National Military Command Center or the White House sit room, and you know what? Those people ask really hard questions. So they're saying, is this the guy we're supposed to take out? Well, yeah, I'm confident. Well, what's the confidence based on? Is it facial recognition? Is it voice recognition? Is it the pattern of behavior? Sometimes they watch these people for days, if not weeks. And are there certain individuals around? So again, pretty basic things that with facial recognition and other means, we can get a higher or lower degree of confidence. And these are the things that that person in that control room waiting to take the shot is going to be asked by someone who may be thousands of miles away. And again, we think AI and machine learning can help solve that. And then if they do take the shot, what's the potential for collateral damage for that weapon? Family members, cohorts, unknown persons. And then the thing that never seems to come up when you've got people say, I don't know if we ought to take the shot or whatever, what happens if you don't take the shot? What happens if these people have all come to some place for a meeting, and if you don't take the shot today, they're all dispersing to wherever they came from, and you're going to have to take 20 shots to take them all out. So again, these are the things that humans have trouble coming up with on their own that we think very convincingly AI and machine learning can help solve. And again, we look to those of you in industry to help us work on those. And again, this is what Admiral Greer said in the Unmanned Systems Roadmap, that you want actionable intelligence. You want intelligence that you can take action. Those of you, anyone in the submarine or in the Navy during the Cold War? Okay, so we're tracking Soviet submarines, and what do we usually, well, we have a 20% probability, or we got a sniff here, and then 6 hours later we got another sniff, and I mean, that's not actionable. That's sort of like we think the submarine was there. We're doing the best we can. If you're going to take a shot at somebody, it needs to be actionable. It needs to be high confidence. And again, this is where we're going with this. It's that picture with General Eisenhower talking with the soldier and the robot standing next to him. That, again, it's combining human and machine intelligence. It really comes down to, it's not the autonomy in the machine, it's the relationship of the machine with the human operator and how you get those two to work together in a symbiotic way. So that bullet I showed in the outline said money talks, and I want to explain a little bit why we're passionate about this, and this is isn't just an academic exercise. At our lab, as in all Navy labs, our model is something called Navy Working Capital Fund, which means there's no line item in the president's budget for the lab. So we're like those of you in industry who are out looking for work, from Navy, from Air Force, from Army, from DARPA, from ONR, and a lot of the work, again, 15% of our workforce is working unmanned systems. In addition to those, work in AI, machine learning, et cetera. So we're pretty persnickety about the kind of work we take on, and we're very particular about the limited internal R&D funds that we invest. Not to tell you tales out of school, our lab does about $2.8 billion every year. We get about 1.5% of that as internal R&D we can invest. So it's about $25 million. That's not a lot of money to go among 4,800 scientists and engineers. So again, this is what Admiral Stavridis, former EUCOM commander, said about labs, and I think it's more true today as we face higher end threats as the National Defense Strategy has laid out. And again, at our lab, we don't build the robots. We put the brains in them. We try to make them better. We've been doing this for a long time. Again, not a pay political advertiser for the lab, but our unmanned ground systems were in the World Trade Center looking for survivors 3.5 days after 9/11. That's 3.5 days. Why? Aircraft weren't flying. We literally trucked them across country. So we've been doing this for quite a while. Again, this is the sorts of things we work on. Some of you probably have participated in or know about the once-a-year contest we have here with the unmanned system robotics contest, seeing who can control robotic systems. But again, this is the stake we have in unmanned systems. Just a very quick snapshot of the kind of projects we're working on, but you see the words DARPA and ONR there a lot. Why? Because that usually involves 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 basic research money trying to solve some of the algorithms, the AI, machine learning, and those sorts of things that still bedevil us. But those are the menu. We also, as I was mentioning to General Wood, we also recently put 4 people a year, 4 full-time equivalents on the Project Maven project, which you heard about in the press with such negative press, but it's still going, even though Google's stepping aside. There's other smart people coming in. So that's the kind of work we do. Again, if our executive director was given an overview brief of the lab, he would tell you that about 75% of our money goes out to industry. So we're not doing all the work ourselves. We're partnering with industry, and we want to partner with you all. So we try to make these guys smarter. And again, my public affairs officer told me if I put this quote up, he'd buy me a dinner at Ruth's Chris. So I want you to alibi that I actually put this up. But Mr. Kendall came out. And again, it's about innovation. It's about advancing technology and taking some risks, because not every one of these 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 projects bears fruit. Okay. Anyone recognize this picture? Nautilus. Remember when it was commissioned? 1954. I got a ringer right here in the front. So why do I put that slide up? If you remember, 1954 was only 9 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And if you read your history, particular biographies of Admiral Rickover, you know that when the Navy said, we're going to put a nuclear reactor under the ocean, the public said, no, you're not. And Congress said, no, you're not. And it took years of convincing that we could do this safely and actually do it. And you know the results today. So that gets me to my last slide, or last few slides. Again, the analogy is, as with the nuclear power program, we in the unmanned systems field have a very high burden of proof that we'll do no harm with unmanned systems. And going way back to Peter Singer's quote at the beginning of the brief, I think it was slide 3, even though we're engineers and techies, we can't engineer out all the moral and ethical issues. So we do need to have a human in the loop, and that human needs to have augmented intelligence so he or she can keep up with the machine and use the machine as a partner. The first time a warfighter has to say, what's the unmanned system doing? Why is it doing that? When is it coming back? You've lost the battle, because we don't have control anymore. And again, we think providing operators, catching us as humans up with the machines by giving us augmented intelligence, by using AI machine learning to give us augmented intelligence, is the answer to that. And again, not a trivial challenge, and something we need all of your help. Our lab hosts, the last 2 years we've hosted something called Naval Applications of Machine Learning seminar. It's a full week of bringing in practitioners, industry people, military, academia to try to help solve problems with AI and machine learning and how we can apply them in the naval parlance. So, we talked a little bit about the military. Let's talk about AI and machine learning in our own lives. Anyone recognize this picture from an article in the New York Times last month? That's the title of the article. Anyone guess what they're referring to when your boss is an algorithm? Okay, the interviewer interviewed over 400 Uber drivers. And the point is, your boss is an algorithm. And they talked about it, again, we've got this in detail in the paper, how when you're an Uber driver, you get all these prompts from the robot. You're doing a great job. You're in the top 10%, et cetera, et cetera. Or when you think you're going to check out for the day, they go, no, your ride is just around the corner and he's going to be awesome. And so it's the robot controlling you and talking to you. So I don't say that anything against Uber. I'm saying as these sort of things enter our lives, we need to be careful they don't enter the military side of things as we're sending unmanned systems downrange. Another way of saying it, for those of you that don't use Uber or Lyft, you probably use GPS. And the point of these gentlemen, one's a Berkeley scholar or the other a Harvard scholar, is who's the robot here? And if we turned authority over to the algorithms. Again, not to say that to be edgy, but to say that as these things infiltrate our daily lives, it may make us less aware of what responsibility we have for military unmanned systems that we're putting in the hands of our warfighters, and that we have a responsibility to do no harm. So, I get off the slides, get off the stage slide. I think we've got enough time for Q&A, so happy to take whatever questions y'all have. Yes, sir.
Are you doing any work in quantum research, quantum sensors to implement AI?
Yes, we have a big stake in quantum and have some really smart people working on that. And we're hiring people as fast as we can to work quantum. But of course, we're competing against the Googles and the Apples and that industry. So that's at SSC PAC, yeah. And that you raise a good point. One thing that came through loud and clear at the ONR A2I Summit was that we talk about AI and machine learning and we forget data and we forget big data. And the point made time and time again at that conference was AI and machine learning are only as good as the data you start with. And there are people working in the areas of quantum to curate the data to make sure that the data that you're actually inputting into the system is the quality you want. But you need clean and curated, yeah, and Six Sigma kind of data. Yes, sir. Good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So that being the case, there's no data governance and big polluted data lakes and things like that, and it's wild, wild west of grab your flavor of open source and do your own, build your next AI.
Yeah.
Is there any sense of let's see what industry really has and trying to stop building it ourselves from the perspective of analysis?
Yeah, and that's exactly why we have that Naval Applications of Machine Learning seminar to bring in people from industry, particularly Silicon Valley industries, to say how do we make sure that our data is good, and if it's not good, how do we curate it to make sure that it's valid? And to your point, it's not the Wild Wild West. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, from our Oracle,
Yep.
so we're one of those big companies, and
Right.
90% of the times we're fighting against an open source group of software that has been raveled together by a bunch of smart guys, and they don't even want to talk to big Silicon Valley vendors that have
Yeah.
solutions out of the box. So I don't know, we're hitting a little bit of a roadblock.
Yeah. Well, give me your card after this is over. I'd love to put you in touch because we do a lot of work with Oracle locally at SSC PAC. Someone else? Yes, sir.
So what do you see, I'm Bill Work from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. So from your perspective, inside a service, inside a lab, where's the Joint AI Center that's being stood up in the Pentagon under CIO? Where's that fitting in this? How much are you going to get guidance from them? How much are you leaning on them to do the are you seeing effort driven their direction as opposed to down to the service level? What's the Joint AI Center meant to you?
So great question, and I had the same question you have about a month ago, and they came out, the people from the Joint AI Center came out and briefed at the ONR A2I thing, and they basically said in a nice way, we're still getting organized. We have a building, who's been in the military before? Listen, and we have a manning profile, but we have no people yet. I mean, they're coming in. So I think that's...
They just try to focus on the
Yeah.
cybersecurity aspects of it.
Yeah.
I hear you, but at the end of the day, the Joint AI Center is gonna be, you know, the central fusion for all DoD AI, right? That's why it's the Joint AI, and I'm just curious.
That's the theory.
I understand
Yeah.
how slowly we in the government
Yeah.
stand up
Right.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
But eventually, there's gonna be a great sucking sound as everything moves into the center of the universe in the Pentagon, and how is that impacting the,
Yeah.
or are the services just kind of pretending it's not happening right now and just driving on?
No, I think honestly we don't know enough. I mean, listening to the people who briefed about that center, they're not stood up enough to have issued policy number one or doctrine number one. So I give it a couple of years just to let them get organized. And but the fact that they have one, I think we're relentlessly optimistic is going to be helpful.
They're spending money.
Yeah, we're spending money. So anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
So is there any work on using drone as an anti-drone?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of anti-drone work going on. One of the things we have in the paper where some of this work's going on that you may be aware of, there's an organization at the Naval Postgraduate School called CRUISER, Consortium for Robotics and Unmanned Systems Education and Research. And it's something that Mr. Work stood up when he was Undersecretary of the Navy. Why? Same reason as the Unmanned Systems Roadmap. Unmanned bridges so many different services and discipline that becomes the node for it. So in the paper, we've got a link to the CRUISER website, and they're doing some of that anti-drone work. But for those of you that don't know about CRUISER, it is the one node that brings together industry, academia, military, etc., just for a free and open exchange of unmanned systems issues, and they do great work. So that's kind of our node in the military. We go to CRUISER. I mean, they have symposia multiple times a year that are open to everyone. They're unclassified, where that kind of work is talked about. But thanks for that question. Yes, sir.
Having gone through the experience of trying to defeat IEDs, very simplistic weapon system, and we had all the technology in the world. Is anyone thinking about a world in which we've convinced ourselves this is the answer, and someone else has been the ultimate disruptor and come in without AI and conventional, and this is building a perfectly engineered future,
Right.
which is almost by itself an oxymoron, because
It is.
there's still a human in one loop somewhere that'll figure out another way to do things. Who's thinking about the other side of this?
I think, again, pointing to CRUISER, General Wood, they do the blue on red simulations and the wargaming for what's the enemy thinking, and they bring in some pretty smart people to play red. But I think, I mean, given there's, most of the concern that we see is the enemy, our potential adversaries laid out in the National Defense Strategy, don't have the same ethical and moral and other strictures we have, so they're going to launch weaponized drones at us. So I think most of the focus now is, oh shoot, how do we deal with them? But to get to your question with a human, I think the best example I can come up with, having gone...
If we pick the right opponent, we can fight the right fight.
Right.
But if the wrong opponent decides that's not the
Yeah.
one we want,
Yeah,
be a little careful about spending this amount of money and this amount of technology and presume this kind of precision.
right. No, I agree with you. I think one example, one concrete example that's near and dear to my heart, having gone through the Strait of Hormuz a dozen times, it's the Iranian FIAC threat, Fast Inshore Attack Craft. And the data shows that you're not going to take them out with guns. You're not even going to take them out with Hellfire missiles from helicopters. You might take them out with directed energy weapons when they finally get here, but this is one of the reasons CRUISER and others and DARPA are doing the swarm on swarm, is for my money, that's the only way you're going to defeat a swarm is with another swarm. And again, you don't want to put sailors in ribs to, go one-on-one, but you use weaponized unmanned systems. So I think that's the answer, where there's humans in each loop, only we're not putting our humans at risk. That's the whole beauty of the unmanned. Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Where do we go to find a copy of the brief that you had mentioned, the Unmanned Systems Integrated Roadmap?
Well, if you go on the AFCEA website where they've captured all the briefings and the papers that I mentioned, there's a link in one of my citations to the, but if you just Google DoD Unmanned System Roadmap, yeah, or you can get the link from our paper. Yeah, and it's brand new, and not to tell you too much, it's the skinniest one they put out. I mean, the 2013 one was over 200 pages. This one's like 50 pages, so it's very focused, and it's very focused on decision-making, not autonomous machines going downrange to whoop up on somebody without human control. So, anyone else? Cowboy, you can leave me alone on this, not ask any hard questions?
No, I was asking how many pictures were in the updated version.
Oh, not enough for aviators, no, sorry. Anyone else? Okay, thank you all for being here. Happy to hang around and answer any questions, trade cards, whatever works for y'all. But thanks for being here. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, of course.